on my laptop just so I can share it real quick with some groups.
Okay.
How are you doing today?
Good. How are you?
Doing well. So the first couple times we did this, we chatted a few times in the day prior, but I hadn't talked to you at all today. So
I know. Yeah, I know. We're winging it now. This is good.
that's good. It's gonna be raw. It's gonna be authentic. All right,
Yeah.
I'm gonna share this a little bit. And so what's been
Okay.
going on with your week? What are some wins you've had this week?
Oh my gosh. Um, oh man, my brain isn't working. Some wins, some
That's
wins.
great.
Yeah. I've had I actually had an incident myself with guilt. It was actually a situation with a client. And I was very happy about the way I handled it. So it's
Good.
very timely.
Well, good. I can't wait to unpack that tonight and
Yeah,
learn some
yes.
lessons from your wisdom. And as I've alluded to in the past, and as you're very familiar with, and some of my closer friends are familiar with, the only reason I do these webinars is just so I can get an hour talking with you and learning from your experience and your
No.
wisdom.
You're very sweet, but not at all. I love it. I love hearing
So,
from you.
yeah, I just spent the last hour from 5 to 6 on a Facebook Live over on a website, Newburn Live, and we are talking all about addiction and some roots of addiction and some things that happen in our lives that lead us to those compulsive behaviors of dealing with the pain and the suffering in our lives in a way that's not healthy for us and it just kind of as I often do when I talk about it. Hey Jill, thanks for joining us. And for anybody that's checking in, please go ahead and say hi, drop your name in the comments so we know who's joining us. We look forward to your conversation, anything that you have to add during this Facebook Live. So thanks for showing up tonight. But what I'd like to do, and as you know, every time I talk about addiction and the reality of it, is bring the human element to it and try to really express and drive home the point that it's part of the human experience. That propensity to seek things external to our body to escape, to avoid, to numb, to deal with that internal discomfort is something every human on this planet does. Unfortunately, for some people, it manifests in ways that have much more drastic consequences when we look at some of the more severe addictive behaviors and chemical addictions or substance addictions. But one thing a major obstacle is the stigma, is the shame, is the guilt, and I think all that comes back to people not recognizing that the things that we do to escape, to avoid, to numb, is just part of the human condition. We're all humans. We're all similar in our motives, and our desires, and our insecurities, in those basic needs that we have in our life. So with that, I'll jump off my soapbox. I see we've had a couple of people join us now. So a great win that you had in your life was a successful navigation through some guilt that showed up.
Yes, I took positive action immediately, which is progress for me. So
That's fantastic. I look forward to unpacking that. So the reason I chose guilt and resentment specifically for this webinar is it's something that comes up and really affects our ability to engage in those things that are meaningful in our life. Both Monica Smith and I are students of and certified applied positive psychologists, and what we focus on is the science of human flourishing, and we look at the pathways in our life that we can engage and experience flourishing so that we can live that happier, successful, fulfilling life and really engage and experience life as we want to. When you look at that in the context of addiction or recovery, we both find it as the most effective or a very effective pathway to helping people move beyond those challenges and the stigma and the consequences of their past so they can live into a better version of themselves. And one obstacle that I see that shows up for many of us, it shows up in my life all the time, and I see it showing up for other people. One major obstacle, especially in the topic of addiction and living in recovery, one obstacle that affects a lot of people and prevents them from engaging is these emotions of guilt and resentment. And they show up in different ways for different people. We process them different ways, but there are some truths about guilt and about resentment, about processing, about moving beyond it, that we can all learn, some skills that we can develop so that guilt and resentment don't take the toll on us as they can. But yeah, a few things hold us back from engaging in our life with and living into our potential more than the burdens that we carry of this guilt and resentment. I was talking with a friend today about what she knows of recovery, and she said that what she's heard in the recovery community is that the greatest, one of the let's see, the greatest threats to somebody's recovery, one of the things that more people blame than anything else for relapsing or slipping back into active addiction is those emotions or those feelings of resentment. And they come up in different ways. So very a vital topic to talk about, especially in this genre, something that's valuable to everybody. So even if you don't recognize some addictive behaviors, you don't consider yourself living in recovery, this is certainly a topic that will help you in your life, and a timely topic. And the reason I chose it for tonight, because we're going into the holidays, and when we go see people that we haven't seen in a while, and we get with some family members that we haven't seen in a while, sometimes those old resentments can kind of come to the surface. And if that resentment is that obstacle between ourselves and that authentic connection or that nurturing connection that we want with our friends and our family, well, then now's a wonderful time to develop some skills and kind of learn some ways to process this, so it doesn't take that unnecessary toll. So for those who have caught the webinars before, this is our third one. Our first one was on mindset, growth mindset. If you didn't catch that one, you can go back. Heather, thanks for joining us. You can go back and look down on the page or in the video history, or if wherever this is posted, we can get you a copy of that, so you can go back and review that. The second one we did was on post-traumatic growth and understanding the difference between post-traumatic stress disorder and post-traumatic growth, the differences between the two and what leads somebody in one direction or another. Also a very valuable presentation that we did. We've got a lot of wonderful feedback on how that's touched and really affected and influenced some lives. Tonight, it's all about guilt and resentment. We're going to talk about the guilt that Monica experienced today and how she's overcome it. Some ways that guilt has shown up in our lives and things that we do, to process a little better. I'm not suggesting, I wouldn't suggest for a second that we have a cure for guilt and resentment, that once you've watched this presentation, you'll never experience those emotions again. Unfortunately, that's not part of the life experience. But I do promise you that you're going to learn something tonight. You'll hear something tonight. You'll develop a skill tonight that will lessen the burden of guilt and resentment and reduce the negative effect or the negative consequence that they have on your life. Monica and we met through attending a similar the same program, earning our certificate of applied positive psychology, and we both have a passion for bringing the knowledge and the wealth of information, the wealth of knowledge of applied positive psychology to serving people in addiction and in addiction recovery. She has her own unique take on that, and we'll talk a little bit about the specific work that she does and some of the wonderful ways that she's been serving the addiction and recovery communities with her work, and some of the neat programs that she's come up with, and just a little bit more on how you can connect with her. Well, Monica, if you just want to share that real quickly. So tell us about your kind of keystone program that you've developed and some of the work that you do, and how somebody could connect with you if they had any more questions after this.
Sure. So, yep, as Garrett said, I am a certified addiction recovery coach and well-being practitioner along with Garrett. So I work with individual clients, couples, and also developed a group program called A Twist on the 12 Steps. It's basically a well-being version of the traditional 12 steps of recovery. So it's based on research in positive psychology, research and resilience. It's a 12-week program. I launch a couple a year. I'm looking to launch one soon. I have to get my act together, but sometime in January. Yeah, I've been saying that for a while, but I'm looking to launch my next group in January. So yeah, that's about it.
Very cool. Are you saying that you're human and you experience some of these normal things, like
very human.
Not feeling like we're doing enough and not feeling like we could do more. So exactly. Very awesome. If you want to learn some more about her work, they can go to what website?
clearmindproject.com.
Awesome. And the next time I get on a soapbox, if you want to drop that in the comments so people can click on the link.
Yeah.
Also, before I forget, for those joining us, in the description of the Facebook Live, you can find a hyperlink to worksheets. So one thing that is fundamental for both Monica and I's work is not just sharing some ideas with you and sharing some things that we find fascinating, but teaching you ways and showing you ways that you can apply what we're teaching so that you can actually experience some effect in your life. One way that we do that is through what's called positive psychology interventions, or exercises, if you will, that you can go through to apply some of the things so you can experience the benefit. And if you are interested in that and you want to use some tools for effectively processing guilt and resentment in your life, these worksheets are a wonderful resource, a wonderful tool. And if you have any questions, again, we're doing a Facebook Live because we want to have conversation and get your questions, have anything that you have to add, and we'll get to any comments that you drop in the comment section, so that we can have, you know, much more meaningful and effective conversation. So what you'll get from this presentation, we're going to learn about the emotions of guilt and resentment, specifically where they come from, understand the role that guilt and resentment play in our life, and recognize some of the tremendous costs that it takes in our life when we carry these burdens of guilt and resentment. And then we'll talk about some different ways that we can release the emotions and move beyond these chains of guilt and resentment that really hold us back from engaging in life. Some of the specific things that we'll talk about is how to identify those thoughts that we have that promote guilt and resentment, some different positive psychology models like the ABC model for understanding and dealing with adversity, so that we can move through and find some peace after the turmoil, inner peace after the turmoil, and then some questions that we can reflect on that will help us deal with that guilt and resentment, and some other ways that we can prevent the negative consequences or the burden of guilt and resentment in the future, not prevent experiencing it, but prevent the toll that it will take on us. I'm looking at my notes because I don't want to miss anything, but it looks like I've covered all the basics. And Monica, unless you have something to add, I'll kind of roll right into guilt and we'll start talking about guilt.
Sure, no, that sounds good.
All right. So guilt, what is guilt? Guilt is an emotion that we feel. And to understand where guilt or what, you know, kind of what it serves, we have to understand when it comes up. So guilt comes up when we have a belief about how something should be, or how something should act, or how something should behave. And we have a reality that isn't in alignment with that belief. So for example, I have a belief that a good person acts in a certain way. A good person does not lie. A good person does not cheat. A good person, a worthy person, somebody who's worthy of love and acceptance, and connecting with their tribe, doesn't do a certain act or a certain behavior. They show up in a certain way for friends. They don't violate that trust. They don't, they don't do things that are against their friendships or against their true authentic self. So we hold this belief that that's what a good person does. And then we commit an act where we experience something in our life that violates that. So if we have a belief that a good person does not lie, and then we find ourselves in a situation where we've told a lie, or we think that a good person shows up in a friendship or in a relationship in a certain way, and we violate that, guilt is the emotional burden that we carry so that we can still believe that we are a good and worthy and lovable person. So guilt is a burden that we place on ourselves. It's a pain that we inflict upon ourselves so that we feel like we can still be a good person because we've paid a certain price, and we continue to pay a certain emotional price, a penance, if you will, so that we can continue to be and believe that we are that good and that worthy person. There's many effects that come from that guilt, but to kind of, give an example. So there's my mentor, Jack Canfield, he talks a lot about, a person that he worked with. It was a young woman that he worked with who she was sitting bedside by her mom. So she was in a situation where her mom, she was elderly, she was sick, she was bedridden, living in a hospital on palliative care, and just kind of living out the end of her days. So this woman left, took time off work, took time away from her family, took time away from her friends, and just sat by her mother's bedside for the better part of a month. After sitting by her mother's bedside, she, takes a little bit of reprieve. She takes a break. She goes and meets up with a boyfriend of hers. And while she's meeting up with him, she, they end up meeting in her car out in the parking lot, and they spend the evening having sex or making out in the parking lot. Well, when she goes back in the hospital, she finds out that her mother had passed away while she was out, frolicking or being with her boyfriend. So tremendous clouds of guilt came over her. Tremendous amount of shame and guilt for not being there as her mother lie dying in her deathbed. She had a lot of guilt that stemmed from religious beliefs. She was brought up in a religion where she didn't think that you're supposed to have sex out of marriage. Brought up in a religion where you should value and honor your parents and always be there for them. So she had all these beliefs that she had taken on that she had violated by through her actions. And the guilt that came over her really, obviously, just kind of, overwhelmed, overshadowed her whole life. So she had this belief, she committed an action that violated that belief, and guilt was that burden that she carried because of the action that she took. So to relieve that burden, to understand, so we kind of understand that burden, and we understand why we choose to carry that burden, because we have violated something, that a belief that we hold true. So if we want to move beyond, now there's many consequences of carrying that guilt and harboring that guilt. It does serve a certain positive function if it helps us learn, or it helps us change, or it helps us do something different in the future. If we can learn from it, it helps us, there is a positive function to it. But the negative consequences far outweigh it. It disempowers us. It steals our mental energy. It steals our ability to show up. Our guilt, prevents us from engaging in and showing up authentically in connections. It steals our ability to engage in things, making contributions, engaging in work, and just showing up in our life the way that we want to. Guilt takes a tremendous toll on us emotionally, physiologically. It manifests in many different horrible ways when the guilt is severe enough. So it has many negative consequences, and it will always take a burden, it will always take a toll on us for the rest of our life, and continue to affect us in the rest of our life unless we can learn ways to process and release it. So I said that guilt is, we have a belief about how something should be, we violate that. If we want to release that guilt, there's one of two things that we can do. We can either change the action that we did, and if we're talking about going back into the past and undoing something, well, that's not a possibility. So if we want to relieve the guilt, we can't change the action that we committed. The only other option that we have is changing the belief that we violated. Now, at face value, that doesn't sound like it's something that we can do. I'm not going to change my belief that, a good person doesn't lie, cheat, or steal. But one thing I know that's true about human nature, and about you and about me and every situation that I've ever faced, is the way that we show up, the way that we act, the behaviors that we commit in the moment, no matter what it is the best that we can do in the moment with the limited resources, skills, talents, energy that we have in that moment to fulfill a basic human need. So it's the best that we can do in a moment with the limited time, energy, or resources, skills, awareness that we have to fulfill a basic human need. And if you look at the example of the woman I was talking about, she had a basic human need. We all have a basic human need for connection, for love, for feeling connected and bonded and valued. We all have that basic human need. And there's many different ways that we can seek and that we can fulfill that basic human need, but it's a basic human need that we have. And the best that she could do at that moment that she committed that action, she was worn down. She'd spent a month laying by her bedside. She had completely divested herself of friendships for that month. So she wasn't getting any support. She wasn't taking care of herself. She wasn't getting any kind of return to herself for her own self-care. So she was worn down. And the best that she could do with the resources that she had, with the awareness that she had, with the energy that she had, the best that she could do was commit the action that she did. And that's not just true for her, that's true for any one of us. The times that we do something that violates a basic fundamental belief about what a good person should do, what we think a good person should do, we do it, but we're doing it with the best that we can do at the time. Now, one time this confuses us is because our best can change every day. Our best can vary depending on how our mental state, our health state, the resources that we've had, how much we've cared for ourselves, those basic human needs that we need. If you look at Maslow's hierarchy, we have security, we have connection, we are connected with a tribe, we have food, water, shelter, we have basic human needs that need to be met. And oftentimes if we violate a belief and we commit an action that's in violation of a belief, it's because we're just trying to meet one of those most basic human needs. If I were to say that a good person shouldn't steal from another, I'm sure that you would agree that that's a valid statement, that's a valid belief. But would you also agree that a good person shouldn't steal from another unless he was doing it because he was starving to death and he was going to die, or his child was starving to death, and unless he were to steal that pie off the neighbor's windowsill, or steal a loaf of bread to feed his child, it's very likely his child was going to die, and that's what he truly believed. There's some there's an example that I think of sometimes with lying, and we think, a good person doesn't lie. Well, what if we know that we tell a lie and it's going to protect a person's life? Um, if you can think of an example where that might be true, lying that somebody is in your house, lying, if you're trying to harbor somebody who's there, maniac's trying to kill them, or somebody's trying to kill them, and you tell a lie saying that they're not there, but it's going to protect their life. I think we can kind of deconstruct any belief that we have and find times where a violation of that belief would not necessarily violate somebody being a good person. And if they're in a certain situation, that violating that belief could be more understandable. So through this and looking at our actions, this begs us to, kind of have grace with ourselves for those actions that we commit and understand that whatever it was that you committed at the time, it was an expression of the best that you could do at the time with the awareness that you had, with the skills that you had, with the resources that you had to fill a basic human need. And if you're lying to somebody, oftentimes that's to fill a basic human need of needing to have connection with another person, and feeling that if you were to tell the truth, that you might lose that connection. It's not as, sometimes that might seem trivial that we're losing a connection, but it is a very fundamental human need that we need to have that connection with other people. I'm curious, Monica, what are your thoughts on that? Does any of that resonate with you, or any of that hit home with you? Is that I don't know, kind of similar to ways that you think about and deal with guilt in your life?
Yeah, no, definitely. Kind of going back to mindset. Mindset is everything with all this stuff. I think kind of along the lines of what you were saying, some things that come up for me, intention versus execution, is something I think I talk to my clients a lot about. They talk in some of the fellowships about focusing on the feelings rather than the situation. So, all kinds of behavior manifests on the surface for all of us. And to your point, unless we're a complete psychopath, which a small percentage of us are, but for the rest of us, the intention underneath is usually being motivated by pain, by fear, by confusion, by lack of energy, by, whatever it is. And so if you really think about, in terms of self-compassion, compassion with ourselves for understanding, okay, what was going on with me that led me to this thing that I'm not proud of? What was going on like 7 layers below the surface? And again, intention. My intention was to protect myself, to not feel any more pain, to not whatever it is. My execution was not great. I could learn something about the execution piece, but so kind of looking at it from that perspective, I think is big. And one of the things that, and I think I'm sure you'll get into this a little bit more, but I kind of joke with guilt that you have to do a little bit of differential diagnosis first with guilt, because there's guilt, then there's shame, then there's pity. And in my experience personally, and also with my clients, those three things get really mixed up into a messy bowl of spaghetti.
Yeah.
So, and guilt, guilt that isn't unresolved guilt can lead to shame, and really that's a we don't want to go in that direction, because it becomes kind of some of the things you're talking about. Guilt is what I did was bad. Shame is who I am is bad.
Sure.
And that's bad juju for a lot of, none of us want to be thinking who I am is bad, So to kind of, first of all, to check in with ourselves to say, like, where am I on the guilt versus shame scale? And kind of get that in check right away. And then not to like throw us completely off course, but I never talk about guilt without talking about pity. Because there are many times, at least in my life, where I think I'm feeling guilty, but I'm actually feeling pity, meaning that I didn't actually do anything wrong. Or I'm not doing anything wrong by setting a boundary, by taking care of myself, by prioritizing my needs, but it feels like guilt because I feel so bad for the other person. I feel so sad about their situation. I look at them and I say, oh my gosh, their situation is so bad, they're suffering, whatever. And it feels like guilt. It really does. I mean, and I hear it all the time. I feel guilty because I didn't, abandon my entire self-care routine and go take care of this thing. And that is not guilt. You know, I think it's really important for people to really ask themselves, am I feeling guilt because I physically did something that caused a harm to someone? Or am I feeling pity? And like, or am I feeling shame? You know, am I like actually beating myself up for who I am as a human being? And so I don't know if I'm like making this.
That really resonates with me. That hits homes, and I'm sure it does with a lot of people. But you know, that's something I face in my life. Is yeah, like I want to show up a little differently. I want to engage a little bit more. I want to help a little bit more. I want to be there a little bit more, and we can get into that place where the we cross the unhealthy boundary where now we're taking an unfair toll on us, and we're pouring out too much of us so that we're not taking care of our not doing the self-care, not looking out for our needs, violating all the healthy boundaries that we've set up because we want to because a good friend would be able to do that, or a good person would show up in that way. But no, that's a very good point, because that's a trap that I fall into, and I'm sure many people can agree they fall into that.
Yeah, and I think that it, particularly in recovery, there's I mean, it's complicated, right? It's complicated with relationships, whether it's a person that's in early recovery that's trying to figure out how to prioritize their recovery and how to sort of prioritize themselves, or whether it's a partner or a loved one that's watching someone go through it. There is so much opportunity for enmeshment and pity versus guilt versus what the hell do I feel kind of thing.
Sure.
And like for me, I think particularly, all these things start out when we're young, right? Like when we're kids, this is how we learn.
Right.
We learn these things, and then we sort of take them into adulthood, whether they were really like accurate or not. And so I think particularly little kids can't distinguish between shame, guilt, pity.
Sure.
They all feel the same, and their little, our little brains can't process these abstract concepts. So if we're not careful, then we get into adulthood and we're not questioning what it is. So, definitely think that's really important. And then kind of going back to your point, once we've determined that it is actually guilt, which is like step one, check, awesome. We know we're feeling guilt. It is about, okay, how can I take positive action about this? Because I can't go back and undo what I did, but definitely can learn from it. It does serve that evolutionary function of like guiding our behavior in some way. How do I not carry it around? How do I not, we always carry these bricks around, right? How do I not put another brick in my backpack and carry it around?
The Bob Marley chains, we look at the long chains of that guilt and that resentment that we carry with us, and if we don't let it go, it's gonna always be there. It'll be that thing that we carry around.
Yep.
And not only takes a toll on us, because I think if we feel like we're paying the only costs, and we feel like it's a little bit more justified because we were a bad person or we did a bad thing, but it doesn't just affect you, it does affect everybody that you engage with. It does affect all those people that you try to engage those authentic connections with. If it's a partner, it affects your partner, because now you can't show up as that best version of yourself or the best version of a partner that you want to be, because you're overwhelmed by, and your mind's clouded by, and your emotions are clouded by, and your efficacy is tarnished by that guilt that you're carrying with you.
Yeah, one of my clients recently said, so the statement that I heard a lot in recovery was, look back, you can visit the past, but don't pack a suitcase, which I always really appreciated. And actually I heard one of my clients last week say, look back, but don't stare. And I really liked that, because we don't want to ignore, we don't want to avoid it. We don't want to ignore looking at it. We want to learn from it. These are the ways we grow, but we don't want to stare backwards. We don't want to live in that place and repeat it over and over again. It's kind of like, you might have done something that you're not proud of, but in your head, you've probably done it 500 times, because that's the number of times you've replayed it.
Sure.
And so we have to take ownership of that.
Yeah, every time it's another brick in your bag, or every time it's another emotional cut. And that brings up a point about, sometimes we feel guilt because we did something, even though we knew better than to do it. Even though we knew rationally in our mind, like, I shouldn't drink and drive. I shouldn't, lie to a friend. I shouldn't, whatever it is, like, I shouldn't lie on my time card and say that I work later, but I did it. Or, I knew that I shouldn't, indulge in that thing or do whatever it was. and we rationally knew better, but we still committed that action anyway. And that comes back to that understanding, that grace, and giving ourselves that room and understanding that our best isn't the same every day. And I think it's the Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. He talks about this a lot. Kind of do your best, but understand that every day your best is going to be a little bit different depending on your emotional health, your physical health, your spiritual health, and just kind of where you are at that time, and where your basic human needs are. And if your basic human needs are met or whether they're not met, if they are, then you're going to show up and have much greater capacity to act more in accordance with that version or that belief of that good person. And if they're not being met, and if you are spiritually drained and emotionally drained and physically drained, then you're not going to have that same capacity to act in that same way. So maybe you knew that there's something that you shouldn't do, you did it anyway. Or we think, I was able to, I didn't relapse last month, I didn't relapse last week, but I relapsed today. What's the difference? Well, the difference is you're a different person in this moment, in this day, than you have been in any other day of your life. And that person, the capacity that you have in this day with all the stresses and the external challenges that you're facing is a different person than you have been in the past. With that, tomorrow you're going to be a different person than you were today. So and I think that's a key element between kind of keeping that guilt from moving into shame, is recognizing that, like, the action that I committed today, that's not me. That's an action that I committed today. It's not me, that's tomorrow. It's not that, I'm not going to have to commit that same action tomorrow. If I lied today and I lied yesterday, I don't have to lie tomorrow. If I had a slip or I relapsed last month, it doesn't mean I have to relapse next month. My future can always be different because I can always be different and I can always be better. And I am not defined by an action or a couple of actions. I'm defined as the character and the person that I am. And finding your way into recovery and just striving to be better tomorrow than you were yesterday says a lot about your character and says a lot about your capacity and your ability to be better and act different tomorrow than you were today.
Yeah, and I think also it's Melody Beatty talks about the concept of recycling, which is, and there is a period of time, and I will say early recovery, but then I can't even say that because I still do it. I probably did it last week, but there are these periods of time, and to your point, it's like when my energy bank account is low, there are times where we do something and it's almost like an out-of-body experience for me. I know as I'm doing it, I'm like, I should not be doing this. This is like, and I'm like, but I'm doing it anyway. I am doing it anyway. And, a perfect example, my husband and I came up with an agreement like 8 years ago to that we do not have any serious conversations after 9 p.m. No financial talk, no emotional talk, no argument talk, no conflict talk, no nothing. Unless something's burning down, it gets tabled because I get psycho after 9 o'clock and I can't have hard conversations, right? So, but every once in a while, a couple times a year, for whatever reason, I just decide that I'm not going to let it go. And it's 9:45 and it's 10 o'clock and he's saying, honey, it's late. We have this agreement. And I'm like, I don't care. I'm doing it. I'm going to keep doing this. And I know I'm doing it and I'm doing it anyway. I just get this thing where I'm like, this is just where I am. And so we have to, and thankfully now I can laugh about it, but there's certainly times where we sort of know we're doing it and we do it anyway. And I think that's just a phase. Awareness is a thing in and of itself. And sometimes we're just supposed to have the awareness. Yeah. And that's enough, and then we'll get it next time. But I think it's really important. And, kind of to the part about shame, I mean, vulnerability is the antidote to shame, period. And that's all of this is about, the fact that we're so freaking scared of being humans. And we're so scared of being vulnerable, and we're so scared of being wrong, and we're so scared of all those things. And the reality is, the minute we're vulnerable with someone and we say, you know what, that was a shitty thing of me to do. I did it because I felt like crap. I did it because I was scared. Whatever, shame dissipates because we all know what that feels like. But we hide from it. And, the problem is the problems come when we hide from it.
That's right. And it's absolutely epidemic. And, in this topic of, behind the stigma of addiction, behind the stigma of substance use disorder, of course, so many people are afraid because there is such a stigma out there, and there is a lot of truth to that. If your self-efficacy is poor and your self-esteem is poor, it could be a detrimental blow to expose yourself to be vulnerable and then to be rejected because somebody else's beliefs or somebody else's reaction to that. But to your point, the more that we can build up that, our self-efficacy and our belief in ourselves and show up vulnerably, that's where the beautiful thing comes in, and that's what really strengthens somebody's recovery. And there's steps that are taken to that in the anonymous communities. Like let's crawl, walk, run. Let's show up in an anonymous community and take that first step to being vulnerable and exposing, what we've done in a public environment. And then when we realize that we can do it there, and we don't die right away, and we're not, abandoned, and we don't, we're not shamed, then we can take that next step and maybe share it with some close friends and relatives. And then as you continue to grow and learn, have that greater recovery capital and learn to and increase your self-efficacy, then you get to that point where you can be open and honest with anybody in public. And I've got a friend who's kind of going through that right now, and it's a beautiful thing when you cross that threshold and you can just, tell people like, hey, I'm an addict, I'm in recovery, I've done these things in my past, because then it takes away other people's ability, whether they intentionally do it or not, but other people's ability, other people's control to use that against you and to manipulate you. If you can bust through that stigma and still stand proud, then that's a superpower, and and now you're standing in a great place, and your recovery is in a great place.
Yep. Yep.
Wonderful. So for me personally, I've got a couple examples that I can share that will, maybe resonate with somebody else. But if anybody's listening or watching, do you have any things in your life that you've been guilty about, or any guilt that you're feeling now that you'd like to, maybe unpack a little bit or talk about? Or maybe you have a friend that feels guilty about something and you want to share with us what your friend feels guilty about. Maybe we can help your friend in a way. But and if you got anything, please drop it in the comments. But for me, I've had, I've been guilty. I felt guilty in the past. I've noticed, as you go through and try to clean up your behaviors, and change your behaviors and recognize the behaviors that you've had that aren't an expression of who you want to be. One thing I recognized that I used to do a lot was joke about people at other people's cost. So I would, point out something that somebody had done, or point out, something that somebody was known for, and use it in a joking manner, to get a rise out of the group. I'd make fun of one guy or something that he did, and to get a rise out of the group. And I recognized I was doing that at the cost of whoever it was I was talking about. I was doing it because of my own insecurity, my own need to feel connected, to feel bonded with people. So I kind of use that humor in a way to fuel my own connection and to deal with my own insecurity. But it was a very ugly way of doing it, by doing it at somebody else's cost. I'm not saying I would ridicule somebody, but I would take something that I knew that other people would find silly, whether a certain way that they did something, or something, reminding everybody of some blunder that somebody had done, but it was always at somebody else's cost. And I recognized that, and I felt really guilty about that as I was kind of processing that and trying to change my behaviors and stop that behavior in my life. I felt a lot of guilt about it. But I recognized, in kind of doing this work, I recognized I was doing the best that I could with the awareness that I had. I mean, I just wasn't aware that I was doing something that was such a negative consequence to other people. I wasn't aware of the cost that it was taking on other people. So with the awareness, the skills that I had, I was doing the best that I could. And I wasn't intentionally doing it to belittle or to hurt somebody or to make somebody else feel any kind of guilt or shame. But once I had that awareness, then I realized that I can change my behavior. And again, I can be somebody different tomorrow than I was yesterday, and recognize that now, maybe today, I have a greater awareness. I have greater skills. I have greater, capacity to act in a different way, and I can act in a different way. But that was something that kind of showed up in my life as I was kind of processing my behaviors, processing my tendencies. It was something that I showed up. And as we all go through the work, and as people in, recovery are familiar with going through the work and looking at those, those character defects, understanding how to process things so that you don't permanently instill that guilt in you, is a vital skill to learn, a vital thing to know how to do.
Yep. Yep.
So tell me about what's some guilt that showed up in your life this week, and how did you process it?
Yeah, so I'm going to be super vulnerable because it's always scary that I'm at the point where I can share nothing about my past freaks me out. I could share anything in the world with anybody, but when I talk about, things as a coach, that's like my scary zone. So I'm going to be very vulnerable. But I had a session with a client. It was supposed to be an hour session, and she was just doing really well. I mean, everything was great, and we were kind of approaching the 30-minute mark, and I just you know, it was my own stuff, which, you know, we're all humans, right? And so I started to feel nervous that she was going to feel forced to do an hour session when she was doing great. And I said, you know, well, do you want to just do a 30-minute session? And I think looking back, I was sort of abrupt about it. And again, it's just like, it gets me every time. I'm always sharing with my clients, say the thing that you're afraid of, say the thing you're nervous about. When you're struggling in a conversation, say the thing, just say it, because we dance around it, right? I mean, and I still, you know, it's still a struggle. And so instead of me sort of saying the whole thing, like, hey, how are you feeling about doing an hour session? Because I'm a little nervous that I don't want you to feel. No, I just said, well, do you want to just do 30 minutes? And and so that's what we ended up doing. But it was sort of, I could tell that she maybe felt like I didn't want to talk to her. I don't know. It was very, it just was a way more abrupt than I wanted it to be. And of course this is my life dream. I like think about coaching 24/7. This is like all I ever wanted to do in my life. So it is my baby and it is so precious. And as soon as we ended, I was like so horrified and so overcome with guilt. And, you know, but the thing that I guess I'm proud of about it is that I at least know enough of myself now that I knew immediately within 30 seconds, I have to take immediate action. Because this is going to eat away at me all day long. And I've got to do something right away. So I picked up the phone and I called her right back. And I said, hey, we need to talk about what just happened. This is, the reality is I just did not want you to feel pressure. But I will talk to you all day long. I love talking to you. I love talking to please, that's all I want to do, you know? But it was my own stuff. It was my own stuff getting in the way of not wanting you to feel pressure. And, you know, I took ownership. I apologize if it came across this way. And it was a good conversation. And I was able to move on with the rest of my day. I still, if I allow myself to ruminate about it, the reality is I want to be perfect, you know? I want to be perfect. I want to never be human. I want to be a robot, you know, robot coach. So, and that's not going to happen, you know, that's not going to happen. And so I've really had to walk the talk of self-compassion. I'm a human being. Everybody has situations like this. I took immediate action. I took positive action. I learned from it, because next time I will just vomit the whole sentence that I want to say instead of, you know, whatever. But I have examples like that every week of just different things. And the one thing I've learned is Monica, do not carry it around. Do something about it. You know, take action.
That's right. Yeah, because it's like friction. You know, the longer you fight it, the more cost it's going to take, the more energy it's going to steal. If you can alleviate it and, you know, and lessen that burden, lessen that amount of time. There's a couple of things that you touched on that I think are really important for the discussion. You picked an example and you talked about coaching. Well, I think the areas where that guilt can be most detrimental is areas of our life where we find our identity and we find our passion. I mean, you find your identity in coaching, and the minute that guilt came up, it questioned your validity or questioned your, you know, how good or how perfect of a coach you were. And then if you have so much of your value tied to that, then it very quickly goes from I'm not a good coach to I'm not a good person to I don't deserve. You know, then we feel guilty about the good things that we have and think like, hey, you know, we don't deserve that. So very quickly, and I think that's an important thing to understand, like, where do we find our identity? You know, do we find our identity in our ability to communicate, in our ability to be a friend, in our ability to be, you know, a parent, a father, a mother? Because if that's a place where we get a great source of our identity, then those are the places that the guilt can sneak up and really take a very huge chunk, take a very huge toll very quickly. So I think that was just kind of an interesting point that I picked up on. I want to just kind of do a whole rehash of guilt, and the reason that we picked guilt and resentment to talk about, because there's a lot of parallels there. So I just kind of want to do a whole rehash on guilt, and then also draw everybody's attention to this guilt processing worksheet. Now, I think it's pretty self-explanatory, so I'm not going to go through it. But I think if you follow the directions, if there's some guilts that have shown up in your life, this can be much more effective to do it with a partner, just somebody that you can talk back and forth with to help you unpack the guilt in your life. Of course, if you have any questions, and you're going through this worksheet and you want to process some guilt, of course, you can reach out to us. We, we'd love to continue this conversation and help you apply this in your life. But so just to kind of recap, guilt is emotion that we carry when we have a certain belief, a belief that a good person does X, or, a loving husband does something, a good friend acts in a certain way, a good daughter acts in a certain way, and then we commit an action that violates that. Guilt is that emotional burden that we take on so that we can still feel like we're a good person. In applied positive psychology, they use an ABC model. There's an adversity that happens, an event or a behavior that occurred. So that would be the behavior that we committed that violated a certain belief. And then we have B, which is a belief about what that means. If the belief is that, I'm a bad person because I lied, then that's going to have a consequence of guilt. So the ABC, adversity, the belief, and then the ultimate consequence. Well, we can't change that adversity if we're talking about an event that happened. We can't go back and undo that event. Of course, we can stop committing a certain action and not perpetuate that in the future, but we can't go back and undo it. If the belief that we hold is that, a good person doesn't do that, then the consequence is going to be that guilt and the thought that I'm not a good person. I internalize that I'm not a good person. The guilt that we carry is kind of our way of holding on to that belief that we can be a good person. So if we can change that belief and understanding that a good person, a loving husband doesn't hide away from his family, doesn't, just avoid his family, avoid his, friends. A good husband provides for his family. A good friend shows up when their friend is in need. A good friend doesn't lie to another, to their friend. A good friend is authentic. And then we violate that. If the belief is that a good person doesn't do that, it'll have guilt. If the belief is that a good person doesn't act in that way unless it is the best that they can do at the time with the limited energy, resources, awareness that they have, the emotional well-being, the physiological well-being, the spiritual well-being that they have to meet a basic human need, then we can give ourselves that grace, not feel that guilt, dispel some of that guilt that we carry moving forward. There's some questions that we can look at and I can send any of these notes to anybody if they're interested or if they can't write them down quick enough. The questions that we look at. One is, am I thinking based on fact? Is the belief that I have based on fact? So is it a belief or is it a fact? The fact would be that if water, at standard pressure, if water heats up to 212 degrees, it's going to boil and become steam. That's a fact. It's a fact that if water cools down to 32 degrees, it's going to freeze and become ice. So that's a fact. Is it a fact that that a good person, I don't know, back to my example, abstains from sex outside of marriage? Is that a belief or is that a fact? Well, if you can question the belief, if you can find somebody else that doesn't hold that belief. So beliefs are very personal. Belief to me is that a Marine acts in a certain way. When I was in the Marine Corps, that a Marine would act in a certain way. I'm trying to think of some other examples that really kind of drive this point home, but if my point is, if you can tie it back to a cultural influence, a religious influence, an influence from family, something that you learned in your family, then you know that it's a belief, then it's not necessarily a fact. And the point that that's so critical is because the next question is, does my thinking help me achieve my goal? Does my belief help me achieve the goals that I have of wanting to show up, wanting to engage the way that I want to? And how does my thinking or how does my belief make me feel? Does it make me feel the way that I want to? And if the answer to these is no, if it's not allowing you to achieve your certain goals of being a good friend, of being a good person, of being a good employee, of engaging the way that you want, and no, it's not helping you feel the way that you want because you don't want to be drowning in guilt and overcome by guilt, then we have to go back to and think of, is the thought, this belief that I have, is it life enhancing or diminishing? And is this thought helping me show up in the way of the world that I want to? If that belief is that I'm not a good person because I committed this act, then I'm not going to be able to show up in the world the way that I want to. If the belief is that, I acted in a certain way because I was trying to fulfill a basic human need, Monica acted in a certain way because she wanted to be a good coach and fill her basic human need of engaging in meaning and purpose and having a strong identity and a place in the world that all made sense. And she was perfect and everything was going well. She had a basic human need of wanting to do that. She expressed it in a certain way and then realized that the way that she expressed it probably didn't demonstrate to the world her showing up the way that she wanted to. And as a result, you felt that guilt.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then guilt is that burden that we carry. So questioning the belief that we have, is it in fact true? And then and some of those assumptions that we have, the assumption that you made that the way that you express yourself in the moment was the right way to express yourself. But then when you change that assumption or question that assumption, then you kind of went back and unpacked that, and that's where the guilt kind of surfaced from. So I'll paste these in the comment section, and I'll paste these yeah, once we're done the video. But there's similar questions on that worksheet that will just kind of help you identify and address through. So I want to do a quick recap because that really helps us roll quickly into our one last point on guilt and why it's so detrimental. And we might have touched on this, but in addiction or in recovery, or when we're facing these things that are often defined in areas of our life that there's a lot of shame or stigma, we can have kind of what I think of as like catastrophizing of thoughts. And what I mean by that is when you commit one action, we feel some guilt from it, and then very quickly it rolls into shame, and very quickly it can roll into if others knew me, they would kick me out from my tribe. So now I must show up inauthentically. I must lie about something. I must perpetuate the guilt that I've probably felt from whatever it was. And that's going to make you show up inauthentically, which we need connection, we need love, we need acceptance. We need to be able to express ourselves authentically. And when we don't, that's what creates a void. That's what creates a huge amount of internal turmoil, a huge amount of pain. And how does that manifest in our lives? That manifests as intense cravings and the need to escape from that pain. And when we go back to those habits that we built and think about those ways that have helped us so effectively in the past, Dr. Gabor Mate says, we don't focus on the good in addiction and why we do it. And that's why we often it makes sense. But, those addictive behaviors and substances do a very effective job of helping us escape that pain. If that pain comes from that, that guilt that we have a small guilt, especially over some way that we find our identity, very quickly rolls into shame, very quickly rolls into a fear that we're going to get kicked out of our tribe, very quickly rolls into a fear that our basic human needs are not going to be met. Tremendous amount of pain and suffering can come very quickly. And then, those cravings, those old habits, those feelings, those urges are going to come back very, very quickly as well. So, to really drive home the point why this is such a vital conversation, especially in recovery, that's kind of, that's my big takeaway. Anything to add on guilt or make any points on what I touched on before we kind of roll into resentment?
Nope, just to make sure people diagnose whether they're feeling guilt, shame, or pity. And
I love that.
I think that's really important. But nope, all that you said was great.
And remind us. So guilt, you said I did bad. Shame, I am bad, or I am a bad person. And pity, just saying like, I should be able to show up in a way that I'm not, and kind of pitying ourselves for not being able to do something in a way that we want to. Does that kind of sum it up?
Yeah, to make sure that you actually did something wrong, and that you're not just feeling bad for someone else. Yeah.
Great. So resentment. So some very similarities with resentment. Resentment, we have a belief about how a person should act. Somebody commits an action and it violates that belief. Resentment is the toll that we pay. Resentment is the resulting consequence that we pay, the emotional consequence that we pay because we think that somebody should act in a certain way and they don't do it. Whether we think that, whoever it is, whether we think that somebody should show up in a certain way, whether we think that our partner should act or show up in a certain way, whether we think that a friend shouldn't react in a certain way, whether we think that our family members shouldn't react in a certain way. We have this belief about how a certain person should act. They commit an action that violates that belief. Now we feel resentment because they violated our belief. So what can we do to dispel that? What can we do to process that? One, we can change the past. I don't know of any effective ways to do that. I'll do some more research. If I find anything, I'm sure I'm going to make $1 billion if I can learn ways that we can undo and change the past. So we can't change the past. The next thing we can try to do is change the person. I don't know if you've ever experimented with trying to change another person, but that a lot of people call that manipulation. A lot of people, that very quickly takes the focus away from something that we can control, something that we are responsible for. It really fuels that, that blaming, that complaining tendency or propensity that we can have, but it doesn't do anything to solve the problem. It doesn't do anything to change the situation. Now, am I saying that you can't, have a conversation with somebody who else is aware and say like, hey, I received the action that you did in a certain way, and this is the way that I received it, just so that You know, and if somebody is understanding, you know, and has that awareness, maybe they didn't realize it. You know, maybe if your client would have called back and say, "Man, I really felt slighted. I really felt like you disrespected me, and you just hung up on me because you couldn't stand to talk to me for another minute." You know, that could have fueled your awareness, like, "Hey, got it. Like, I absolutely did not mean that. And now that I know that you received that specific action that certain way, then I can change my behavior in the future." So that's an example of, you know, of a way that maybe you could influence or help somebody change their behavior, but it still comes back to the way that you receive or you perceive that certain action. Absolutely, am I not suggesting that, you know, you can tell somebody to become a different person themselves, fuel shame or fuel guilt in them by even suggesting that they should act in any way other than what they did. I think back to the work by Katie Byron and, you know, and our propensity to try to change somebody else. It's like, "Hey, you shouldn't do this." Well, you know what? Well, I did do it, and so that would suggest that, you know, maybe I don't know, in a sense, like I should do it. That was the right thing because that's what happened. We can go back and try to unlaminate that and figure out. I don't know. That's a whole downward spiral that we can go in, a whole tangent.
No,
we
I
can go
wrote,
off.
look, you can't
Yeah.
see this. This is a mess, but I wrote Byron Katie. That's what I
Yeah,
wrote.
perfect.
So we're on the
Wonderful.
same page. Yeah.
You know, and if you drop that in the comments for anybody that wants to Google it, it's called The Work.
Yeah.
If you want to be a little
Yeah.
bit more familiar
I'll
with
do it.
her, with her stuff. And actually, if you look at the questions for resentment process, you'll see some parallels and some similarities between questions that she processes in the work. And the work is just what she refers to as the work that she does to help people with resentment, with guilt issues. So we can't change the past. Very ineffective to waste our time and energy trying to change another person, trying to make them into a different person. We don't want to deal with the consequences of doing that anyway. We want to look at ourselves and look at where, you know, and bring that locus of control back within us and focus on what we can change and what can we change. Just like we talked about with guilt, we can change that belief. We can create some space. We can modify that belief. We can bring some grace into that belief. The belief is that, you know, a good friend does not lie to you unless a good friend, you know, a good friend shows up when you need to talk with somebody. Let's see, you know, an employee doesn't steal from you. You know, a parent doesn't abandon you, like, unless they're doing the best that they can with the time or the energy, the resources, the awareness, the skills, and the emotional, physiological, and spiritual well-being that they have at the time. And also, we're always only acting in the way that we've been conditioned to react or respond to things in our life. So if somebody responds to a situation different than what you think they should respond, well, they are also a different person. They also do have a different nature and a different nurture, and they do have a different way of seeing and understanding a situation and reacting or responding to that situation. Sometimes we might face a certain situation and we react one way and we get, you know, offended, or we get energized, or we, you know, it fuels us, or it fuels our passion, it makes us respond compassionately or in a certain way. For another person, they see that and they respond in a much different way. All comes back to who they are, and them doing the best that they could with the awareness that they had. A lot of pain, a lot of resentment, I think, stems from just not having an awareness of what somebody else is thinking or what their intention was. You know, somebody will commit an action and we think that it was done with a certain intention, and then that fuels a huge amount of resentment. And when we're feeling that resentment, we don't want to cross that line and open lines of communication and become vulnerable to deal with something that we think that they did wrong or that they wronged us. But that only perpetuates that feeling of resentment. A lot of times you can just have that conversation, like Monica, like you said you did, and just kind of, you know, open yourself up and talk about what you were thinking and share some of your intention or your thoughts or your motive, your thought process behind what you did, and really help, you know, air out whatever that was so that it doesn't spiral into that shame and that resentment. So
Yeah.
resentment, you know, accepting people for who they are and accepting that whatever they did, it was the best that they could do at the time with whatever resource they had. And again, if we're going to give ourselves that grace and recognize that maybe we acted better or differently before, today we act in a way that we don't want, tomorrow we can act in a different way. We've got to offer that same grace to other people who are also just humans going through the human experience. If they acted in a certain way before and then they violated that belief or that trust, you know, today, it doesn't mean that they're going to continue to act that same way in the future. And the time that they did violate that, they were doing the best that they could to meet that basic human need. One thought that always comes up for me about resentment And one of the reason it cuts us so bad, because a lot of times we take it personally. Back to the four agreements, don't take anything personally. The book by Don Miguel Ruiz talks about don't take anything personally. A lot of times we take very personally the actions that another person commits, and we think that it's all about us, and the whole world is all about us, and everything that they do is about us. The truth is, they're committing actions and they're dealing with the world from the way that they see it, and to fulfill their basic human needs, just like we're going through our days trying to fulfill our basic human needs and engage the world the way that we perceive it. If somebody acts in a certain way, if somebody lies to you, that's not about you. That's about them trying to fulfill a basic human need. If somebody violates your trust, if somebody does something, acts in a way that you don't think they should, that's not about you. Again, that's about them trying to fulfill a basic human need for security, for food, for shelter, for love, for connection, whatever it is. But when we take it personally and we think it's against us, one of my favorite sayings is, my actions, the things that I'm doing, whether I'm setting a boundary or I'm acting in a certain way or I'm, reaching out in a certain way, that's not against you. It's for me. If I'm setting a boundary, I'm standing up for myself. It's not against you. By all means, it's not against you. I'm doing it for me. It might come across like it's something against you, but it's not. It's something that I'm doing for me. Well, that cuts on the positive. It's also the same on the negative consequence. When somebody violates you in a certain way, they betray you in a certain way, they, act in a certain way, they don't show up, they don't respond in a certain way, they don't respond with the, whatever emotional response you thought that they should have at the time. That's not against you. It's because they're just being them. They're just living. They're just being a human. And whatever their action is, it's for them. It's for them trying to fulfill a basic human need, whether that's acceptance, whether that's, whatever it is. So it can be very hard. And this is something, like I said, this is not a cure-all. This is not a guarantee that you'll never feel resentment again. In my own life, in my story, I feel, there's things that have been going on recently in my life that make me feel a lot of resentment. And again, it's because the times that I feel that resentment, it's because I'm internalizing, I'm processing an action in a certain way. And when it fuels that emotion, that rage, that anger, that frustration, that resentment, it's because I'm internalizing in a way that is against me. I'm thinking that, somebody's acting in a certain way because I'm not enough. Somebody's acting in a certain way because I'm not doing enough. Somebody's acting a certain way because I'm not a good enough person myself, and I'm internalizing their actions as a demonstration or an expression of me in some way. And that's where a lot of that resentment comes from. Having that awareness and being able to process it helps me tremendously, but it doesn't alleviate all that, that propensity towards that resentment, that propensity to kind of react in that, or that respond in that way, that have that kind of that mental response. So understanding that and working through this and kind of being familiar with the way to process that can help, but it's not going to alleviate it forever. We're still going to have those same emotional response habits that we've created. We're still going to have those same insecurities. And when we take somebody else's actions as something that's against us and we personalize it, then it can have, then it can cut us more deeply. But resentment is something that takes a tremendous toll on us, because those resentments, again, they cut off that authentic connection. They affect us. They weigh down on us. They weigh on our mind. It's things that we think about. I mean, how many times have you laid in bed at night and you think of some resentments that you have, or somebody has wronged you during the day, or somebody has not shown up the way that you wanted them to, or somebody didn't act the same way that you wanted them to? Now that's now affecting you emotionally and physiologically, and probably spiritually in a way if you can't find meaning from it. But that resentment, I love the way Mahatma Gandhi says it. He says that resentment is like drinking a poison and expecting somebody else to suffer. We feel and we fuel this tremendous amount of resentment in ourselves, thinking that thinking that's going to have any kind of effect on that person that wronged us or that person that betrayed us. But the truth is, many times we get betrayed. Somebody acts in a certain way that fuels our resentment. They're oblivious to it. They don't know. They don't care. They go on. They're living their life and they have no consequence of it whatsoever. But we continue to live in and ruminate in and suffer from that resentment because of the way that we're processing and the way that we're holding on to it. So like Gandhi says, it's like drinking poison and thinking that the other person is going to die or the other person is going to suffer. So to move beyond that resentment and to release that resentment, one thing we can do is question that belief that we have, and and offer that same grace that the person was doing something for them, the best that they could do at the time to meet a basic human need with whatever awareness that they had and whatever conditioning they had. Forgiving. So moving beyond resentment and using forgiveness to bridge that resentment is it, it's something that we know that we need to do. It's a very touchy thing, a very hard thing. A lot of people feel that, and this is one very important thing about resentment or about forgiveness. One, forgiveness is done for you. It's never done for somebody else. You're never relieving your resentment for somebody else. You're doing it for you so that you can relieve yourself of that emotional burden. Forgiveness is not, if you forgive somebody for their actions, you are not condoning their actions. You're not saying it's okay that they did what they did. You're not pretending that it didn't happen. What you're simply doing is relieving that pressure, that burden on you for feeling that emotion or that resentment. And I think a lot of times people kind of come up against a wall and they say, oh, hell no, I'm not going to forgive somebody for the way that they treated me or the way that they betrayed me, thinking that if they forgive it, that they're saying like, hey, that was okay, no harm, no foul, let's move forward. Like, especially with terrible traumas, people that have been attacked, violently attacked, people that have been raped, people that have been molested, people that have, been betrayed in some of the worst ways. If you can find yourself to forgiveness, in no way are you saying that like, hey, that was okay that you did what you did. In no way are you saying that you're condoning it or that, hey, let's just pretend it didn't happen. What you are saying is that me, the individual, that the person offering the forgiveness is worth not having to feel that resentment and that pain. You're worth more than that pain, that resentment, than that feeling, than that emotion that's been holding you back and driving you to a place. A lot of people that find their way into substance use disorder issues and addiction stems from trauma that had happened to them earlier in their life, whether it's a developmental trauma and emotional trauma because they weren't loved and connected in the right way, or because something tragic and something horrific happened to them and they were molested, they were beat up, they were, violated in a certain way. That pain and that suffering, we can look at the mechanics of kind of how that happens. When you have to, when you hide behind that shame, a lot of times for children, they process that in a guilty way. They think like, hey, I was a bad person. That's why this horrible thing happened to me. Or if somebody knew what had happened to me, somebody knew that, that a relative or a neighbor was molesting me, then they would think differently of me. Therefore, I must hide behind this. Not only am I feel guilty that it happened, but now I've got to hide behind secrets that it happened, not let other people know that this happened to me. Now you're showing up inauthentically because you're showing up as a version of yourself that's not true and full expression of yourself. That creates a void because now your connections that lack that authenticity and that purity of connection that you need for that basic human need. Now you have a tremendous void. Now you have a lot of pain that you're carrying around. And the more that you carry that pain around, the more it's going to keep you from not only is it going to keep you from engaging in life the way that you want to and showing up and making that contribution that you want to, but that tremendous void, that tremendous pain, there's not many ways to relieve those depths of pain other than those behaviors and those substances that we find. And if you can find yourself in recovery and you can move beyond using those means of escaping, avoiding, and numbing that tremendous amount of pain, that's great, but that's only going to last so long if you can't go back and now relieve that tremendous amount of pain. If you can't fill that void in some other way, if you can't, dispel that vacuum in some other way, there's always going to be a tremendous amount of pressure to fight that craving, and fighting a constant craving is always going to, just that energy of fighting that craving is going to continue to weigh you down. So long diverge. Almost dropped the mic on that one, if you will. So kind of long a roundabout story of just saying like how important it is to forgive somebody. And forgiveness is not about condoning it or saying it didn't happen. Forgiveness is saying that you are worth it. You are worth moving beyond that pain. You are worth living a better life and not having to hide behind that resentment and that pain forever, not allowing it to define your future. We touched a little bit on this in that post-traumatic growth discussion that we did. The fifth point about it is about resentment, about forgiveness and moving beyond it. It's not an immediate release. You can't just decide like right now, like, hey, I'm just going to forgive somebody for that, if the betrayal is big enough, if the trauma is big enough, you can't just, snap your fingers and move beyond it, in the moment. A lot of times we take that emotion and we pack it down very deeply, and we do it for a long period of time. We do it over and over. And every time that resentment comes up, we pack that pain, that suffering inside. It's going to take a process to move beyond that completely, to fill that void, to move beyond that pain. But it's absolutely worth it. It's absolutely worth every bit of that effort, and it's absolutely possible, and it's absolutely something that you're worth. If you're hiding behind that pain, if you're still dealing every day with that pain and that suffering and that void from resentments that you have from trauma that's happened to you in the past, you are absolutely worth doing that work to move beyond that pain, so you don't have to have that past define your entire future and continue to be a shadow over you for the rest of your life. You don't deserve that. You deserve to have more, to engage more, to experience more. So you're worth taking that effort. I'll let you jump in for a few moments while I fix my camera, and
Yeah,
I'm just kind of, I know you've been writing down a lot of stuff. I can't wait to
I
hear what.
have.
Yeah, please. So please share with us everything
Yeah.
you got. And
No, I
also,
will.
anyone watching, please share your comments.
I see we have a question too,
Yeah.
so I want to make sure I get to that, to Paul's question. But yeah, I was furiously writing while you were talking, so I'm going to try to like just vomit all of it really quick. First of all, for everybody, Q-tip, quit taking it personally, is a recovery slogan. That's a great one. So for anybody who's struggling with taking things personally, I highly suggest you carry a Q-tip in your pocket, because it's a good touchy-feely thing that you can remind yourself when you're feeling hypersensitive to taking things personally. So I wanted to throw that out there. But biggest things that come up for me with resentment, first of all, and you touched on it, boundaries. So resentment to me is sort of these two diverging things. It's an important cue. Resentment is an important cue or a flag for me. So when I'm feeling resentment, either A, there's a boundary that I need to be setting that I'm not setting with someone, or there's a boundary that I missed somewhere along the way that has led up to me feeling resentful. There's a lot of times, and most of the time with resentment with me, it's usually something that I'm not doing for myself that I need to be, there's something I'm missing about something I need to be doing for myself. And so a couple of examples of that are when I start getting resentful, for example, about my husband not having a routine. Well, guess what? When I'm feeling most resentful about him not having a routine, it's because I'm slacking on my routine.
Sure.
I'm not
The things that we
doing
judge in others are those things that, we're most judgmental of ourselves.
Yeah. So that's like, there's tons of examples of that, where I'm looking at somebody else about what they're doing, and the reality is there's something I need to be doing for myself that I'm not doing. So it's a lot of times it's a cue about a boundary, but also it's an acceptance issue, and you touched on that already. It is a lack of acceptance about a person or a situation or a circumstance the way that it is, and it's this feeling of powerlessness and feeling of lack of control, which is triggering, for most of us. And so the biggest thing for me, when I think about, when I'm in a resentful state, I'm feeling like a victim. I'm feeling victimized, and maybe I have been victimized by someone. And so really a victim at its core is an absence of choice. Being victimized is when someone has taken choice away from you. And so for me, the quickest way out of it is to figure out what my choices are, and to really ask myself, like, what choices do I have in this situation, and what positive action do I need to take for myself? Because that is what switches me from victim mindset to empowerment, or victim, they talk about in the empowerment dynamic, the drama triangle, transitioning from a victim to a creator. So
Yeah.
how can I make choices for myself in this situation? And I think in terms of, Paul asked a great question, which was, have you been deeply hurt by someone, and how did you get over it? And boy, that would be another hour session, but I will try to say, in my case, I believe, I've just come to this place of belief that we learn through contrast. And, every situation where I've been deeply hurt, abandoned by people. Well, I believe that I experienced abandonment in order to learn how to not abandon myself. When I have felt betrayed, I believe I've experienced betrayal in order to learn how to not betray myself, how to not betray my values, how to not betray my boundaries, how to take ownership of my self-care. When I have felt an absence of love from people, I believe I've experienced that in order to learn what true self-love really is, and how to nurture myself. And I don't believe I would have gotten to any of those places had I not experienced the people who I consider my teachers, who have given me the contrast experience of, this is what it feels like you know, this is what it feels like to be hurt. This is what it feels like to feel like you're a piece of crap. This is what it feels like to be lied to. This is what it feels like to be abandoned. And I feel, you know, was that fun at the time? No, it's not pleasant. But now these are the core things that make me who I am, and these are the core reasons I feel a sense of well-being in my life. So I am actually, so every time I am harmed by someone or I feel resentful, if I can get myself to a place of gratitude to, okay, you know, thanks for challenging me in this way. Because I grew a strength out of it. I grew a character trait out of it. I practiced a skill out of it. And you know, we can talk a good game. All of us, we can talk a great game about self-care and self-compassion and boundaries and all that stuff. That's great. But you know, until it's like I say to my clients a lot, we can talk about playing tennis, but until you get in the court and you get a racket in your hand, you're just talking about playing tennis. So at the end of the day, I think these things, these really hard life skills, are most strengthened by having them challenged. And that mindset for me is how I've gotten over the most deep hurts in my life. In addition to thousands of dollars of therapy and all kinds of other groups and all that good stuff and workbooks and worksheets and all that. But really, it's a mindset. It's a mindset shift, and it's about making meaning out of negative experiences. So I think I covered my messy notes. I think that was the majority of it.
Well, I love that Q-tip. You know, that's wonderful, and you know, that's what we got to remember. Not, you know, it's not all about us. Even though we're seeing the world and experiencing it through our eyes, it's not. You know, everybody is not just an actor in our play. They're all living their own lives as well. So that's very powerful. But it's not about us, but it can be about us in that form. Like, you know, I saw it was a meme today talking about resentment, and it said that, you know, there's so much that we can learn from this type of mentor, and it says it's our tormentors. You know, they're still our mentors. They're still helping us learn, even though they're tormenting us through the process. But they're exposing us to experiences where we can really learn, where we can grow, where we really can test our boundaries, where we really can, you know, test our beliefs and see if, you know, and see if we do have the skills, see if we are able to walk the walk. And it can be very difficult. And I'll share one last story about how it's showing up in my life, because this kind of ties the guilt, the shame, the pity, the resentment, all of that together. So, you know, I've had an experience recently where I felt very, you know, very betrayed, and I've been lied to. And there's an element of that for me, you know, very similar behaviors, you know, all exact same behaviors that I manifest in my own life, you know, in the past. So it gives me a unique experience to see it from both sides, both, you know, the betraying side, both and on the other side, both the actor and the recipient of certain actions. So for me, like, I don't want to feel the resentment. I don't want to feel that pain. I don't want to feel that suffering. I want to move to forgiveness as quickly as I can. Like I said, it's a process. It takes some time. You do have to unpack it and do a lot of work. I want to move there as quickly as I can. I don't want to feel resentment, because the version of me that I want to be, that's not authentic. That's not authentic to carry those resentments, to harbor that ill will, or to wish anything bad for somebody. I want to move beyond that as quickly as I can. Now, and there's a sense of guilt when I can't do that. There's a sense of guilt when I do have that resentment, when I do have that anger, that frustration. I feel guilty because I'm not showing up the way that I want to. And I think that ties more back to your pity, because I'm not showing up the way that I want to. But I also feel guilty, and there's also another emotion of, you know, some shame and guilt, because I want to fully love and accept a person that's violated me, because I want to know in my heart, and I want them to know in their heart, that they're fully, you know, worthy of that love and that acceptance, and that they're a perfect person just as they are. Because if I can't see that and accept that for them, well, me as somebody who's done exactly the same thing, committed those same, you know, violations and those same betrayals, then that says that I'm not worthy, and I'm not whole, and I'm not lovable just as I am, and I'm not a perfect being. So there's some very strange, you know, emotions there as I unpack that and as I live through that. But a lot of that is, you know, it bounces, it's all over that court. It bounces back and forth between that guilt, that resentment, that pity that I can't forgive more quickly, that pity that I'm harboring, you know, those emotions and not able to move beyond it. And then also guilt and insecurities, you know, in myself from taking things personally. having it resonate with and personally affect my own insecurities and my own sense of worth. You know, is somebody just lying to me and they're not reacting in a, you know, an emotional way or the way that I think that they should, this belief that I have about how a friend should act or somebody, you know, somebody should act, are they not acting in that way? And the story, you know, the stories that come up for me as I'm processing this is they're not doing that because I'm not, you know, I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, which really fuels my desire to push through that and find that forgiveness and move through that resentment and, you know, kind of move beyond all of this. But as I said, it's a process, and, you know, and as we, you know, none of these things show up in our life in isolation. There isn't just like a, you know, a clear cut ABC in our life, because there's a confluence of so many other emotions and experiences and circumstances that are going on that make this cloudy. But if you can understand it at the essence, you can understand it on the fundamental level, then you can have these tools and really apply these things in your life. What do you think? Any thoughts or comments on that? I know we're kind of we're about an hour and 20 minutes now, and as long as we're providing value and as long as people have questions, I'll stay here all night. But I don't want to drag anything out too long and get up on a soapbox now that it's approaching 9 o'clock and I lose my capacity to self-regulate.
Yes, I know. My 9 o'clock boundary is approaching. No, I agree. I mean, I was actually, I had pulled up a great reading from one of the 12-step fellowships, one of my favorite readings about acceptance, and I was going to read it really quick.
Yeah, please.
And acceptance is the answer to all my problems today. When I am disturbed, it is because I find some person, place, thing, situation, some fact of my life unacceptable to me. And I can find no serenity until I accept that person, place, thing, or situation as being exactly the way it is supposed to be at this moment. Nothing, absolutely nothing happens in this world by mistake. Unless I accept life completely on life's terms, I cannot be happy. I need to concentrate not so much on what needs to be changed in the world as on what needs to be changed in me and my attitudes.
I love that. Where'd you find that?
That's actually, it's from AA. I can send it out. I'll send it out in the comments. It's one of my favorite. I keep it on my phone so that when I'm having a rough day and I'm finding myself feeling resentful, I read it. You know, I read it as many times as I need to, so that just need the reminder. And again, it really for me comes back down to I will most of the time when I'm feeling really that sense of agitation, I'm not taking care of myself. Sure. That's usually what comes up for me. So yeah, the big book, exactly.
I love that, moving to the gratitude as quickly as you can, because it's, you know, it's illuminating some things in your life, and, you know, in ways that you don't want to, you know, show up. And those biggest insecurities, you know, you know, like I said, those things that we judge in others are really the things that we're most insecure of in ourselves. So that's, you know, a great point and great way to, you know, to get to that gratitude so that we can begin processing it in an effective way. Please, as you have any questions, well, first of all, make sure that you download these worksheets if you want to be able to refer back to them. I will keep this video up for a period of time. The best place to see it is over in the Life Unchained group. And if you haven't joined that group, you can do so. Just type in a Life Unchained, it'll come up as a group and you can join it. That's a place where we try to post a lot of these resources and further that discussion, broaden that sense of community and that acceptance so that we can find and share resources to help people live more into their recovery. I hadn't completed this by the last live that we did, but I did complete that free resource that I was talking about to help people take those first steps into thriving in their recovery. I'll post a link to that. You can also find that in the Life Unchained page. Next up, so I've got some ideas for what I want to cover in January as we try to turn a new leaf and you know, and live into a better version of ourselves in the coming year. One thing that's been coming up for me a lot in conversation and that I've been reading a lot about is you know, kind of making those changes, like righting our wrongs and correcting our wrongs. A lot of times, a lot of the behaviors around addiction and around substance use disorder are those, you know, the violations of integrity. And we kind of touched on that a lot today with the guilt and resentment. But when we are, you know, actively doing things and committing those behaviors that we don't like, those things that are wrapped up in kind of in this, you know, in this umbrella of addiction and substance use disorder, sometimes, you know, it's often our integrity, it's often the ways that we show up, the ways that we present ourselves, the truthfulness, you know, the tendencies towards manipulation of experience or of events or of people. And when we're working in our recovery and we want to change that, it takes, you know, you can't, you know, we might make the decision that we want to change immediately, but to rebuild that trust, to rebuild that connection, to help others kind of, you know, to really rebuild that integrity and that trust so that others can believe in us again and believe us and see us in a new light. It takes a lot of work and it takes a process. So I want to talk a little bit about that because I think that's, and this is, I think that's a huge source of resentment. When we decide that we want to change and we know in our hearts that we have changed and that we're working very hard to be a different version of ourselves, a better version, a more pure version of ourselves, the version that we want to be, it can fuel some resentment when other people don't immediately accept us as a different version of ourselves. You know, when we're established in, you know, in new behaviors and new thought patterns and trying really hard to, you know, to effectively live in our recovery, and other people still see us as that person that we were and bring up the past and bring up those things, I think that can fuel resentment for a lot of people. So I want to talk about ways that we can most effectively take those steps to rebuild our trust, rebuild others' belief in us most quickly and effectively, so that we can make progress in that direction and we don't have that greater propensity towards that resentment or that breeding ground for resentment. So once we get through the holidays, I'll post a date for that, but you can look for that as an upcoming presentation. And if you have any questions or any thoughts about that before the presentation, please, I'll always email, and you can drop comments and or send me messages in a Life Unchained or on Facebook anytime.
Yay.
What do you think? You got any parting wisdom or thing that you'd like to share?
No,
How can
just
somebody get on your email list and get and be notified when you do your next twist on the 12 steps?
say that again. What?
How can somebody get on your list or get notifications when you're going to do the next twist on the 12 steps?
The best thing to do would be to go to my website and sign up to get updates, because I will send it out on my subscription list, or they can just email me if they're interested. I'll put it in the comments, my email. Yeah, that would be great.
Wonderful. And I'm dropping a comment with that First Steps program. A lot of people say, you know, oh, I want to make a change. I want to kind of live more into my true potential. I want to overcome some of these challenges from my past. How do I do it? Where do I start? That's what I put this program together for, help people take those first couple steps towards a better recovery, towards thriving in their recovery. Of course, if you have any topics, anything that comes up for you, we've kind of been putting some topics out there that, you know, come up in our work and come up in our own lives and conversation. But if there's any area of your life that you would like some help with, and please always, you know, send us a message and let us know how we can serve you.
Definitely.
And I'll let you take it and say your goodbyes, and then I'll bid you farewell.
Yeah, no, thanks everybody. It was great. I appreciate everybody's comments, and it's a really important topic. So I just want everybody to know that we're all human and that it's okay, and that we need to be more vulnerable with each other. And it's, you know, it's hard, but it's the thing that turns shame around faster than anything else, is vulnerability. So just grateful to be here.
Yeah, grateful for you, Monica. Thank you very much. You have a wonderful night.
You too.